these regular conversations in this cold office with these microphones, it just made me want to just quit without a job today.
No, so you're leaving to set up a consultancy type thing. Do you know exactly what's coming next already, or?
Not exactly, but that's part of the fun of it. To let you in on a secret, I've been thinking about this for a while. And it's partly just the stage of my career where I've been a journalist for 15 years. And God, I've been covering this industry for nearly 10 of those years.
And you're still with us until the end of the year. So
yeah,
plenty of time still with the Media Leader left.
And hopefully beyond that, again, I would love to keep writing for the publication. We're still going to be friends. I'll be a supporter of what you're doing in the future. So I would hope that, if you'll have me, I'll continue to be a friend and contributor.
Come back on the podcast. I mean, it is a cold room, but we'll miss the banter. I mean, the audience is going to miss the banter.
Yeah, well, if you'll have me, I'll be happy to keep talking to your audience.
Well, we'll keep it in mind. But you will be sorely missed as an everyday presence.
I miss you too. I will.
Welcome to the Media Leader Podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin.
And I'm Omar Oakes.
And this week we'll be recapping what was an absolutely wonderful experience at our conference last week at the Future of Media London. If you're a regular listener of the show, you'll remember just a few weeks ago we recorded a similar recap episode of the Future of Media Manchester conference. Well, soon after we ran a similar event right here in London at the fantastic King's Place. Hundreds of the top media and advertising professionals in the industry attended. There were loads of speakers. And we were both up on stage chairing interviews and panels, and we want to talk about all that we learned. So Omar, I wanted to start just by asking, if you had to boil down takeaways from the conference into one key word, what would that key word be?
One key word. Well, I was actually struck by, I guess, confidence would be the word. I heard a lot of people give quite compelling reasons for why they're feeling more confident about the immediate future of media, as in 2025 and beyond. The first thing that I did on stage was interview the DMG then CEO, because shortly after the conference he's got a new job, but Rich Caccappolo, who was running DMG Media, owner of the Daily Mail. He's now moved to vice president. Quite bullish about the future of publishing in particular. And its other piece was something that you in particular, Jack, have written a lot about this year, whether it's regulation. We've had the second trial about Google. We've discussed that in previous episodes of the podcast. The European Union seems to get really serious on moves to break up Google. The tech dominance and impact that is having on publishing might be weakened somewhat. Regulation, much more positive noises about that Caccappolo talks about. And, we've written about Daily Mail's video strategy. It's not a completely unique strategy in terms of trying to be multi-platform, podcast and video, but actually getting serious about investing in the tools and the talent and having the strategy to think about licensing deals, which is what The Guardian is pursuing, trying to get Netflix to pick up documentaries from Guardian original journalism. So publishing, lots of confidence there. Also, I hosted a data-driven marketing panel with a mix of people from advertisers and agencies, talking quite confidently about the post-cookie future, where we've known for a while that marketers have needed to find better ways of mixing first-party data, third-party data. But we had Sam Taylor from Direct Line, who was also with us in Manchester, as you mentioned, and talking about Direct Line's kind of 2-year journey to kind of set up this clean room and actually say, okay, we can actually do this now, where we're mixing our own huge treasure trove of data with what a media owner might have or a third-party supplier might have. And this is what we're doing with it now. And I think you're going to see similar large advertisers start to tell that story over the next couple of years, now that they've actually done that painstaking work behind the scenes with these clean rooms. Interestingly, we've talked at previous Future of Media about how important it is for advertisers to speak directly to the CFO of any major organizations, to talk the language of the boardroom financially. But actually, you talk to people like Sam Taylor, within their organizations, they're talking more to the chief information officer or the chief data protection officer more than the CFO, because of the need to kind of use their data and mix their data better.
It's interesting that there's so many different things to be confident about, because, and we're about to, this episode will be released the same day that IPA Touchpoints comes out. So we don't have the data just yet. We're recording this on Tuesday. But the last IPA Touchpoints sort of gave a lot of optimism about the industry picking up again. But I remember like a year, certainly the past two Future Medias that I've been to were a little bit more subdued in terms of that confidence level. I think because it was all about, it felt very defensive. You need to defend the importance of marketing. Here's how you do that to the CFO, or get your CMO to communicate that to the CFO. And there was still some conversation about it that I'm sure we'll get into as well. But it was coming from a much more positive angle, I feel like, this year. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah, I think in the last couple of years, with inflation being really high, with there not being lots of confidence from consumers in spending, I think, frankly, you'd look like, you look pretty obscene if you kind of started kind of tub thumping about the future of media. Marketing is great, when it didn't feel like that on the ground. But I think that the mood in the country is a bit different now. It's funny, and even regards to media agencies, I also interviewed UM's EMEA boss, Susan Kingston Brown, who, I asked her the blunt question, a question I ask of a lot of media agencies, like, especially for a big network, what separates you from your competitors? What's that defining USP? And you have to watch the interview back when it comes out on our YouTube, but really interesting conversations about how you think about creativity from a media agency perspective in a different way. And
is that what sort of separates the agencies from each other, the sort of creative thinking?
I mean, no. I pushed her on this. What really seems to be separating them is the proprietary tools that they work on. And I wrote this in my column last week, where you could argue that long gone are the days where media agencies are seen as those trusted media agnostic advisors, where your brand trusts them to make decisions on their behalf. Very often the client is much more prescriptive about what they want a media agency to do. And on the other side, the media agency is kind of willing to say, yes, boss, whatever you want. And by the way, here are these great products that we've developed in-house. And it's usually the products which are the determining difference between a publicist versus an IPG or Omnicom WPP. But yeah, confident nonetheless. And of course, as I'm sure you want to talk about Project Origin, it's always just Origin. I interviewed Phil Smith, the Director General of ISBA. Very fascinating conversation. And yeah, advertisers generally, I can tell you, the ones I've spoken to since Origin launched in beta 2-3 weeks ago now, very confident, even more so before, about the value that they think that Origin is going to deliver. So
it seems like just the broadcasters are the only ones that are not quite so on board. It seems like the demand from advertisers for Origin, from people that I spoke to at the event as well, is high. But broadcasters still, as we've talked about in this podcast and as we reported, have their concerns around measurement. And we Barb's Justin Sampson wrote a piece for us. I think it came out the day of Future of Media in London as well last week. So did Phil Smith address that at all when you spoke with him?
I wouldn't say it's just broadcasters who have issues with Origin. I mean, people all over the industry that are familiar with what ISBA are trying to do with Origin will have a view on it. It's important not at the same time not to conflate Barb, which is the TV measurement company, and has stakeholders which go beyond TV. The IAB is a Barb stakeholder. We've got into reasons in previous podcasts about the problems, the issues that broadcasters have with Origin becoming seen as a currency, when it's not, abiding to the standards which Barb would want itself to be measured against. And I think from Phil's point of view, again, you have to watch the interview back when it comes out on our YouTube channel. But they've always took the position that they're very keen on talking to the broadcasters, talking to Barb, talking to about having Barb within the ecosystem. That's what they want. But they made it very clear that they're prepared to go with their own Kantar panel. Kantar also does the measurement for Barb. And it's not just broadcasters that have raised issues with not having Barb in Origin, it's also the agencies as well. Because remember, it's the agencies who ultimately are going to have to pay for a lot of this when Origin wants to start getting advertisers to pay for a levy. There's a concern that advertisers are just going to pass on that charge to their agencies. And suddenly if you're a media agency, you're paying for Barb and you're paying this levy to Origin when you've got two different TV measurement panels, it seems. So still questions to be ironed out.
Questions, but Phil expressed confidence, optimism.
Yeah, he's a really accomplished. You can see why he's risen to be, just a mere senior marketer to director general of ISBA. He's a very confident speaker and interviewee. So I saw a lot of confidence. Jack, what did you see kind of on the things that you did on stage and the things that you watched at Future Media?
I think the big word that I came away with, and maybe it was just because this one presenter, Avinash Kaushik, who's the chief strategy officer of Crowd, just stuck in my mind, maybe because he used very, say, unclean language, explicit language, to describe how important the word incrementality is. That was kind of the word that that stuck with me from the conference, which is simply the idea that you need to be able to prove that your ad actually had a significant business impact. That you didn't just sell more of your consumer good because people wanted more of your consumer good, but because the advertising actually communicated a message and convinced someone to buy your good. That's the idea that needed to be communicated. And the presentation, which I think was really well received. I mean, it got claps, which not every presentation gets an audience cheer necessarily. Was really strong. It was sort of saying that a lot of marketing, a lot of what we do in marketing is quote unquote bullshit. That there's a lot in there that doesn't necessarily get you to measure incrementality, to measure, brand uplift and purchase intent, and that's really all that people should be caring about. And you should be measuring your incrementality of using different media channels, and you can go to those media channels and ask them to do it for you with conversion lift studies. A lot of especially big platforms are able to do that for you for free. And that if that's not what you're doing, then you're sort of doing it wrong. I just thought it was a very strong presentation, and people afterward were sort of talking about that as like, this is, if I take away one thing from the event, I think I need to take this away, because it makes you bulletproof to the CFO, as we were talking about earlier, that this conversation still is occurring in terms of needing to convince the CFO that marketing deserves to be an investment. Well, in order to do that, you have to just prove properly through incrementality that it is working for your business. And otherwise, the CFO could turn around and say, you get less budget. Maybe you have to lay people off, right? I would recommend, especially when the presentation comes out on YouTube, to go and give it a listen, because I'm not repeating some of the strong language that was used, but it was really passionately delivered. And I think that also did add to the argument.
Yeah. Well, I didn't, I was on just after Avinash, so I could hear some of it. I won't repeat it either. It's funny. This guy Avinash, I don't know him. I met him at Future Media London last week, and yeah, he's a gangster. He's got 300,000 LinkedIn followers.
He's got a whole newsletter, and he used to be at Google. Yeah. And Jenny Bullis, who she's at Dentsu now. She was at Meta. She was just about to come on stage with me, and Avinash was speaking. It's like, oh, Avinash, yeah, he's great. And he has a lot of adherents and followers in the industry. Luke Smith, CEO, founder of Crowd, who I know listens to this podcast. Hi, Luke. Just constantly singing his praises, and you can see why, because he's very engaging. What other speakers sessions that you watched stood out to you? I know you attended the Future 100 session, which I was not able to attend because I was on stage elsewhere.
Oh my God, you missed out.
I missed out on an extremely important session, it sounded like.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite things that we've started doing at Future Media. So a couple of years ago, we launched the Future 100, which is our way of, we really want to champion the next generation of leaders, because there's no getting around it. They're just more incentivized to talk about solutions. We're all about values at the Media Leader. They talk about we want the industry to be better because ... And so we thought, well, let's actually get people on stage and let's kind of create a competition around it. And actually, it helps us kind of find out what the broader industry wants as well. So we get them now to present manifestos. So we had 5 people from the Future 100 present their manifesto, a 3-4 minute pitch about how this one thing will really help the media industry be better next year. And the person that won was Vanessa, Jarrad from publicist media agency Starcom, who it really resonated. Her suggestion was that every media advertising company really takes public speaking as a priority. And she talked about her personal story where she was asked to do, even just an internal meeting where she had to pitch to a deck, and she just couldn't do it, even though it might be on Zoom, Teams call or whatever. She just couldn't do it. She was paralyzed by this fear. And I've talked to so many people over the years who just really fear public speaking. And even in the past, we've talked about this, Jack, where coming from an American university and having studied at a world-class UK university like Oxford, you were a bit shocked, weren't you, about kind of
I was going to mention this, yeah.
Yeah, the lack of in England, there's just such a lack of public speaking training that we have.
It's really interesting. I grew up, even before I went to university, in elementary school, they forced you to give presentations for the whole class a couple of times, and certainly in middle school and high school, or what do you call that, primary and secondary school. That was a core part of the curriculum. Like sometimes you would take an exam, but then sometimes you would say, okay, you need to give a 5-minute presentation about a topic. And within a term, you would do a couple of those. And certainly that was a big thing in college. And then going over to grad school and interacting with UK students, it wasn't, there are some basics that you can learn about giving a presentation in terms of how many words do you want on the PowerPoint? Basically as few as possible. You want more images, you want basic bullet points. And it seemed like no one had been taught some of these presentation norms or skills to really make a really strong presentation. And this obviously, I don't know enough about the broader British education system. You actually experienced that. I don't know, maybe you had a different experience growing up and having to do loads of presentations. But that was not, I was surprised to see that that's just not the case here.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And it's something, my daughter's just started primary school, and I think about this a lot. Because we have to be on stage, and even what we're doing now, we're kind of talking to a microphone, and people out there are going to be listening, criticizing. I only hear good things. Hopefully, liking some of what we talk about. You don't have to; just don't listen if you don't like it, right? But we get some training, but if I think back to my education, it's my extracurricular activities where probably helped me to do this stuff we're doing now, such as being in school plays, being in a band. I was in a band, and just that experience of being in front of strangers and having to perform in the moment. That's an experience that for the modern workplace where you have to communicate and work with other people in an office, that is so important. It's so important. And just before that, we know it's important to our audience, and we had a really great public speaking trainer, Bill Britton, who gave a really helpful talk about that. And it's funny because this woman, Vanessa, Jarrad, who won this with this pitch, I didn't vote for her, actually. I have to admit, I didn't vote for her. Such was the quality of these Future 100 pitches that all the ideas really had merit in different ways. So the vote was somewhat split. So I'll just quickly run through them. So Pedro Ramos from Group M, he urged people to think about why mental health should be regarded as a key metric for high performance teams, actually measuring how we're delivering better solutions for mental health. Maya Herm from Relo Metrics, she gave this presentation about why media investment matters in women's sports. Caroline Ailing from JAA, this is the one I did vote for. She argued why the industry needs to make shared parental leave the norm, which
you've talked about that,
which
before.
I just think is a complete no-brainer. But I suppose getting into the audience head, why maybe it didn't win is because that's maybe something that government needs to legislate for, and it's really an issue across all professional industries.
Yeah,
that if you want more men to take parental leave and you reduce the stigma around women taking maternity leave, then you just need to equalize things, even though it might seem counterintuitively because you're giving men more rights. But anyway, so I voted for Caroline because I think that's a no-brainer, and it's an issue close to my heart, obviously. And then finally, Aaron Watkins gave a really interesting talk, actually. He talked about his vision to create a platform for the Future 100 Club, where there's we take this Future 100 idea and we actually institute it more on a wider industry scale, which I can't do it justice with a pithy summary. But again, have to watch the presentation on our YouTube. It was a really interesting idea he had. And yeah, if I can give you an insight into why Vanessa won, I'll just quote this because it was one of many powerful quotes she gave. She said, "Our industry thrives on confident communication, but for those who don't come ready-made with that skill, it can be a recipe for poor mental health and sometimes career halting. It's not just about individuals. I also believe it's business critical." And yeah, it's pretty hard to argue with that.
Yeah, if you're in the communications industry, I think that's an important skill set to be able to develop. But not everyone's going to have it going in. Yep. So I agree. I was very glad to read about those manifestos, and we'll be, I'm sure, talking with more of the Future 100 Club going forward to make sure that you hear straight from their mouths as opposed to just us reporting on what they said.
Yeah. You know what? This leads me on to something I wanted to ask you about. So you interviewed the LBC presenter, broadcaster, James O'Brien. And first of all, you asked him something that I've always wanted to ask James O'Brien, but I haven't had the opportunity yet. Because when I was a local newspaper reporter, like 10, 12 years ago, I used to listen to James O'Brien in the car. Same show. This guy's been doing it for ages. And so he kind of like G's up his audience to do a radio phone in for his talk show, right?
Yeah.
And nowadays, I don't listen to the radio in the middle of the day, but I do kind of see LBC clips on YouTube, usually when I'm brushing my teeth, and I see James O'Brien clips all the time. Still doing the monologue, right? It's brilliant content, right? And so I wanted to ask him, what's more important to you nowadays? Is it kind of getting people to do the phone-ins, or is it, social media, YouTube clicks? Is that why, how do you put your monologue together? And you asked him this question, and especially bear in mind what we've just talked about with public speaking, I'm fascinated by the answer he gave.
Yeah, well, first of all, he said that he doesn't think at all about the audience, that's not the way he produces the show. So he doesn't care whether or not someone's listening on radio or social media. He's not going to make a clip, like say something that he thinks is going to be really good for a clip on social media. Right. So that's first of all. But I think to more to your point, he doesn't script his monologue, period, at all. So he's just going completely off the cuff.
I don't believe it. He just goes completely off the cuff. I just don't believe it. How does he do that?
No, I was really genuinely shocked, especially because I worked on shows in late night TV where you script everything. Make sure the monologue is scripted. They nightly monologue at Stephen Colbert, and that's scripted. Obviously, there's comedy and humor involved, so you need to set up jokes and write that. But I was like, surely everyone must do this, because if you're going to talk he'll do monologues for 10 to 20 minutes sometimes. And if you're going to talk for that long, uninterrupted, you need to at least, it doesn't have to be a full proper script, sure, but you need to at least have your bullet points of like, I want to hit this point, this point, this point, this point. Anyone who does public speaking or has been trained in public speaking would at least be told, make sure you have your note cards where you want to hit point after point after point. And I'm sure that would be part of any training for younger people that should hopefully come based off this Future 100 manifesto. But for James, I guess he can just get away with really speaking off the cuff. And it requires a great deal of general knowledge and preparation in a different way, I suppose, to be able to speak confidently without having inaccuracies for that long every single day is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I know. Like I compare it to stand-up comedians, where you do the circuit and you're refining a routine that you're practicing many, many times. So you are memorizing but adapting also. So I'm sure if you were. I'm sure someone out there is doing this and analysing every single monologue he does, there is maybe a lot of repetition that happens. But yeah, it was a fascinating insight into just how a broadcaster does a show like that.
Yeah.
Obviously, a lot of people, he's not everyone's cup of tea, but I think generally he's regarded as a broadcaster you can trust. So I imagine you did talk a lot about trust.
We talked a lot about trust. I asked him a number of questions related to the topic and related to he's ideological. I think is sort of what you were saying to the point, which is that, he has views. He used to be a BBC Newsnight presenter and ultimately stopped working at the BBC and only does LBC. And I think in part because he wanted to express himself openly, and you can't necessarily do that on the BBC, which has strict standards, right? I asked him in terms of trust whether or not news media generally, not his show or not the LBC, but news media in general, does a good enough job of creating trust among audiences. And it was an interesting answer because he first couched it. He was saying, well, define trust, because, and I think he used the Daily Mail as an example of like, well, the Daily Mail readers trust the Daily Mail, right? So they're actually a trusted medium. But then someone who doesn't read the Daily Mail might look at the Daily Mail and be like, this isn't a trustworthy source of information necessarily, depending on what they're reporting on. And so there was an interesting point that he was making about trust essentially being subjective. So I asked him a question that was more like, well, objectively, there must be an objective truth. Are news organizations doing a good enough job of communicating that to audiences? And the answer he got was generally no, or at least that there's a big issue among certain outlets of false equivalency that gets made. Obviously, on his show, he gets to share an opinion. So you have the information, but then you also have how he thinks you should be digesting that information, and how he thinks you shouldn't be just as well, because he'll get callers in and they'll always have talking points that go against what he believes, and he usually is able to poke at those. But in terms of false equivalence, I think he obviously is someone who worked at the BBC. He mentioned, and he's written about in his book as well, and you can go read, that there were issues where you'd have a topic such as, I don't know, let's say Trump's tariff proposal that's going on right now in the election, and you'd have an economist come in and say, well, Trump's tariffs are going to be bad for the economy, which they are. I mean, every economist agrees. But then, especially at the BBC, the feeling that there needs to be some balanced opinion, you would need to find a counterweight, even if they weren't a very trustworthy source of information, and then have them on and talk about that. And that doesn't actually serve the audience proper. I mean, it's an argument you've heard from Emily Maitlis as well, and a lot of other ex-BBC presenters. And
it shows how deep the problem runs, because in the UK anyway, and it's coincided with the Trump election in 2016, but and
Brexit,
and it coincides with Brexit, where we still, it seems 8 years later, still haven't really. I think we're better at talking about the problem, but major news institutions don't seem better at providing the solution about how to crack this particular nut, because the issue, as I see it, is people who are in senior editorial positions at these organizations seem to think that they are politicians themselves, where, to your point about equivalency, you're seeking out balance. You're saying, okay, this view that somebody's telling me about Trump tariffs, you're saying an economist saying that this is bad. Well, okay, then we need to go to the other side to get balance, because we need to appear to be politically neutral. But that, to me, says that you're interested in playing a political game, because to your point that you asked for James O'Brien, if you're actually interested in objective truth, and because, we're human beings and it's all, we're all kind of limited by our faculties, you can never get to objective truth, but you can strive towards it. And I don't think you ever strive towards objective truth by putting it through that hall of mirrors, kaleidoscope of this is what the political balance looks like.
Right.
Because then you're just trusting that the political climate is somehow equal.
Yeah.
And it's even to say it out loud is to refute it. It's ridiculous. You have to have, you surely are in that senior editorial position because you have a wider perspective than just whatever immediate party political issues are going on in your own region. It's ridiculous.
It brings up a lot of interesting questions, like in terms of right of reply. And I asked James about the whole platforming debate, which he gave it a quite interesting answer on as well. And again, these videos will all be up on YouTube, so you can go back and watch the interview. But for instance, if you give the right of reply to someone from the Trump campaign or to Nigel Farage, let's say, and he uses that to just lie about lots of things, is that an appropriate use of space on your publication? These are big questions that I think a lot of newsrooms have struggled with. But I think the point that James was making is that newsrooms can struggle with this and be held accountable. And some of them aren't doing a good enough job. I think he would probably argue that LBC in his show can do it. He has more freedom to say what he thinks, and that a lot of reporters don't get to do that. But it, as a whole, news, it needs to work. needs to work on itself. And obviously, we're only a few weeks out from the campaign, a few weeks out from the presidential election in the U.S. James doesn't know which way it's going. No one really knows which way it's going. He said that the odds have been improved since Harris has joined the campaign instead of Joe Biden. But these will be issues that persist, I imagine, regardless of who wins in the U.S. and how the Labor government does here over the next 5 years, that news organizations are going to just need to continue to work to strive to be better. What other things? I mean, there were lots of big interviews. So I interviewed James, but you interviewed Stephen Miron.
Yeah, James O'Brien's boss. Yeah. So Stephen Miron, Group CEO of Global, is stepping down at not the end of this year, next March. I always think it's the end of this year. Yeah, but it's 16 years. He's been at the helm since they created Global. We did this sort of valedictory, not quite This Is Your Life, if you even know what that show is, Jack.
I don't know. Am I too young or am I too American?
Both. So there was a presenter called Michael Aspel, and the whole conceit of this, which was essentially a chat show, but they would always start the chat show by the celebrity would be filmed doing something in real life, like he'd be like turning on Christmas lights or some public facing thing, and there'd be a camera mysteriously filming this person, and Michael Aspel would just appear out of nowhere with a big red book and say, hey, celebrity, hey, James O'Brien, this is your life. And James O'Brien would be really shocked. And,
it's like Christmas Carol.
And then, no, they would just, and then they just decamp to the studio, and, it would just be a more conventional chat show with images and things. But so we didn't do that. I've just spent 5 minutes talking about this interview. It wasn't. So it's sort of a whistle stop tour of Myron's career and a lot of his views and philosophies about leadership in media, which is really, really interesting, particularly at a time where, we're 3 years after we started emerging from lockdowns, and, he had particular views on how much people should be in the office, for example, and taking risks as a private company, because of course, he inherited a business where the radio industry had been in decline for something like 10 years. And he'd come from the Mail newspapers and, come from a very kind of aggressive environment where he was, fighting with Lord Dacre about, creating this website for the Daily Mail, and maybe they call it Mail Online, and, oh, no, we can't do that. And, he had it was a very clear picture which emerged of Stephen Miron, where, he didn't go to university. Neither did Ashley Table King, the founder of Global, the owner. They work very closely together on this venture. And so, these guys, they don't go to university. And, Stephen, he was fired from the first job that he had, I think it was at Safeway, from a retail job. And he ended up going into media like a lot of other people do, because, that sounds interesting. I'll give that a laugh. I'll give that sales. I'll give that a go. Found out he was quite good at it, and he was risen up through the ranks, and he's had to be quite sharp elbowed and aggressive to do that. It's really the picture that came across. And, even came across in terms of the company culture at Global, where, it's not for everyone, as he intimated. And it paints a really interesting picture of where we are in the media industry nowadays, in terms of this company where it's been very highly acquisitive. Global's much more than an audio company now. It's a digital audio company. It's an outdoor company. They, he described how they very aggressively acquired the Exterior group, how they acquired Guardian Media radio brands when others coveted those acquisitions, and they've had to take risks. And it's gone from being worth 250 million in 2008 to now being just under $1 billion. And he compared how Global's grown and compared to the Daily Mail, which he left. He had some fun at that. And,
it's not like the Mail got a few pot shots.
Yeah. But, he's got a lot of friends in the industry. There was a video that we played where Carolyn McCall, Nicola Mendelsohn, Tim Davey, all singing Stephen Miron's praises. So, it's a good opportunity to champion someone who's had such an extraordinary career in this industry. And I hope will be inspiring to people who take their career to the next step. you're never going to have another Stephen Miron or anyone like that. The industry is changing, will continue to change. But yeah, inspiring, I would say.
I'm sure there will be people that are like that have a certain drive. It was interesting. I feel like the most controversial part from that interview, just from talking to people, because I didn't get to sit in on it, but just from hearing afterwards, it seemed like a lot of people were like, I don't know how I feel about making sure everyone's in the office all the time. Because it sounded like Stephen was really pro be present in the office, and a lot of people have gotten used to hybrid working or work from home practice. So that seemed controversial.
It's one of those situations where I'm not trying to be weaselly about it, but I can see it from both sides, and both sides can be right about it. So I'm slightly older than you, Jack, even though I know I don't look it. But, it suits me quite well now that I'm experienced. I can kind of get on my work. I work in quite a creative job where I'm having to write and think about things. It suits me actually quite well to have 2 days out of the office where I'm at home. I can think about things, not be distracted. And I've got the experience to do that. I know what I'm doing. Whereas if you're a younger person, and particularly if you're in a less creative job, you might actually need to be working more hand in glove with a team and a manager. And it doesn't really suit you as the younger person if your manager, the more experienced person, wants to work at home twice a week. So how do you square that? I haven't heard any compelling arguments from anyone across this media advertising industry about how to square that circle. But what I do know is it puts a lot of pressure on managers to come up with bespoke solutions. It can't just be up to CEOs like Stephen Miron to dictate a policy. I don't really think companies like Amazon are particularly helping things by saying that everyone should be in the office 5 days a week as a blanket policy. I think it puts a lot of pressure on managers to make that decision for their own teams within the parameters of whatever company culture the CEO is trying to set. But then look all the managers that have left this industry. This again, it comes back to there is a crisis in talent, specifically among middle level people who have got some experience, but not to reach C-suite yet. And they don't really see that ladder is available to them because they're not being given the support. They're being forced into the office more than they want to. Maybe they could earn more money doing a different sort of job. This is a big challenge that organizations will continue to face. And it's teething problems as we're moving beyond a workplace where people, as I've said before to anyone who will listen, we're moving away from this Victorian model of people punch in, punch out 5 days a week to more of a flexible labor model where people are coming together on projects and dispersing, and coming together on other projects and dispersing. And, if you want people in 5 days a week, I think you're going to struggle increasingly.
Is everyone going to be a consultant someday?
No, because it's not for everyone. And depending on what line of work you're in, it doesn't suit everyone. I think, if the key variables are how experienced you are, how proactive you are, how good at sales you are, how good you are at adapting and learning as you go, and also how creative the work is as well.
Well, I think that's a pretty good way to end it. Nice bookend to the sad announcement that you'll be leaving us, because to be doing more consultative work. But Omar, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. I look forward to doing this again in the coming weeks before you leave.
I'm not dead yet.
You're not dead yet. Yeah. You're not dead. Yeah, that's true. Just mourning already. Pre-grieving as from Succession.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know where you wanted to talk about this, but yeah, I am leaving at the end of the year. I'm not joining a rival or anything like that, but it's just come at a time in my career where I think it's time to do something differently. And to be frank with the audience, there's lots of creative things that I would like more time to do, as well as have a bit more time to see my kids grow up. But I might like to do something much more long form. I'm having some really exciting conversations with people about projects for next year. And, I'm serious. I would love to keep contributing to this podcast or writing for the Media Leader. But we can talk about that another day. Listeners, if you want to, please lobby the Media Leader to keep Omar Oakes in some fancy way. Please do.
Always a pleasure, Omar. Talk next week.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Media Leader podcast. can find and listen to all our episodes on our website at themedialeader.co.uk or wherever you get your podcasts. But just remember, please do subscribe to be notified when we release our next episode. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm editor Omar Oakes. Our executive producer is Jack Benjamin. See you next time.